right. Happy Tuesday. Feels like a Monday, but it's a Tuesday because of the holiday. Glad you guys are here. Thanks for being here. Today we're going to this is actually the kickoff of our series on 2025 planning. So we are obviously in the thick of 2025 planning for all of our clients here at Winsome Marketing. And we wanted to have some of these conversations kind of out loud, like how we're thinking through different areas of marketing planning for 2025. So we're inviting people who know more than us about various topics, in this case, Franco Valentino from Narrative SEO, to just talk us through how you're thinking, Franco specifically, and then how our team internally is thinking about 2025 and SEO, knowing that we've been subject to a vast amount of volatility in 2024. So remains to be seen if it will get better or not. But Franco, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate to get some time to pick y'all's brains as well. So, well, we're a technical SEO firm, so we're a little bit lower level than the content side, which is why we work together so well. And we have a lot of challenges. I think all of us as digital marketers in this realm are facing a lot of headwinds from each platform, right? Everybody's trying to keep their own traffic, and they're going to compartmentalize and optimize for their own channels. So infrastructure stabilization is, something that's very near and dear to our heart. So we kind of start with that, is a website fast and light and configured so the robots can crawl it appropriately and absorb your content. So looking forward to discussing some of that as well.
Absolutely. So division of labor happens a lot. So we do content, but we don't do any technical stuff, and basically decided last year that we never need to because Franco's always here and his team is always here. And so it's kind of like, Franco, tell us what's wrong with this website. Also, Franco, can you rebuild this website? So Franco has tons of experience. He's our go-to for anything in the technical SEO department. And I think the reality is the intersection of all of these disciplines is coming to a real tipping point because, like you said, Franco, there's a lot of analysis I think that marketing directors do and website owners do that has to, ultimately uncovers kind of fundamental performance flaws in the website that we would have historically said maybe we don't pay as much attention to, right? And now it's kind of like, because traffic has dropped off and organic has dropped off for so many people and so many organizations, it's kind of like we have to start looking under the hood and being more intentional about some of these very basic principles.
Exactly. And I think you hit it right on the head when you said, there are fundamental flaws in the way that, that things are produced, right, or configured. And the one commonality that we see that is the biggest fundamental flaw is companies talking about themselves versus talking about the end user, right? And that sort of has a waterfall effect or hierarchy into everything that you do. Because when you talk about the premier this or the best at X, you've lost the user at that point. How do you solve problem, agitate, solve, right? Our typical copywriting formulas, reflect and mirror the problem they're having, and then things fall into place. Now, that doesn't mean that Google, Bing, Yahoo, et cetera, search engines are going to immediately place you where you want to be on page one because of these fundamental other differences in the technologies, right? But we can at least level set all of that, level set the playing field. So when the user does get to our site, it's faster than 2 seconds. So we don't lose 60% of our clients, or 60% of our visitors that could potentially hit our website, that they feel it's a trust signals is basically what we're talking about, right? Make me, give me a good experience, and all of the robots will sort of benefit you for that, right? Depending on the channel that you're using.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our and I want to have Ross and Shannon kind of introduce themselves a little bit in their roles here. And I kind of thought we'll segue to that with one of the best performing videos on my YouTube channel recently, in the past maybe year or something, has been a training that Ross did on site mapping. And it's a skill that I think anyone who's creating content or a website needs to understand, because just like you said, Franco, there can be immediate frustration and site performance issues if people aren't getting it out of the gate. So let me give a little bit of just high level. Here's what we're going to talk about. And then I want Ross and Shannon to kind of introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into it. So we want to talk a little bit about what we're thinking about SEO in 2025 based on what we've seen in 2024, which, like, spoiler alert, has been unbelievable and insane. And like, who would have thought? Talk a little bit about AI's role, because we're all being inundated with offers for AI to transform the way we do marketing, but like, will it, right? Or we'll see. Google's impact. So the recent changes at Google, like if people haven't heard about it, they need to, and we just need to start, I think, figuring out better channels of communication for marketers who have historically been very disassociated from SEO. So like CMOs and marketing directors to get a little bit more in the loop about what's going on and what we need to do about it. And then things like data, right? And then content at scale, which is something we're working really hard on. So I think it's going to be a really good conversation. My goal is like, let's pack it in. Let's illustrate how we're thinking about this, how we're planning about it for our own digital properties, for our clients' digital properties. And then hopefully, any marketing directors or CMOs kind of in our network will be able to benefit from our thinking and take away some kind of action items for their own planning. So that's the idea. So Ross, do you want to kind of give a heads up who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Ross Henderson. I am the head of consulting here at Winsome Marketing. And what that really means is that I work with a lot of our clients, helping them think through what their content strategy should be like, what their user experiences should be like on their website, and how they really communicate with their clients and their prospective clients. So, obviously SEO and Google is a huge vertical for that. It's definitely been an interesting year. As both of you guys noted, there's been a lot of change, and I think things are, pretty much unrecognizable from where we were this time last year. So it's been certainly an interesting year navigating through all of that. I think we've done a good job of it, and now we're kind of in planning mode for 2025, helping our clients think through what they want to do, who they want to be, how they want to communicate their message, and how they want to build those connections with their clients and their potential clients. So really excited for this conversation today. I think it's going to be a super interesting one. Really kind of looking forward to hearing from Franco and from Shannon, and obviously from yourself as well, Joy, about everything that we're thinking for 2025 and beyond.
Thanks. Ross hears from me plenty. Yeah, so let's favor Franco and Shannon. Shannon, you want to give us a little intro?
Sure. So my name is Shannon O'Shea. I'm a senior writer here at Winsome, and I was previously with SEMrush, so I have a good amount of fluency when it comes to the fundamentals of SEO, keyword research, that kind of thing. I spend a lot of time in and out of the office thinking about how these technical aspects that Franco touched on, like say site mapping, user experience, and SEO kind of connect with and disconnect with the types of storytelling that we want to do in our content, and where the user actually is in their journey and how we can kind of finesse that. So that's my point of view on this whole thing.
Gosh, that's so well said. I love that. I'm gonna have to pull that from the transcript. Awesome. Okay, so let's start with just where we're at. So 2024, I mean, what adjective can't you use, right? Disruption, chaos. Give us like the actual story, Franco. Like what happened this year?
The overarching message in one single word is AI, right? And the disruption that's like a life-changing technology is going to cause. And if you even look over the last 12 months, and our lives have been turned upside down by it, essentially, because it's going to impact, and it will continue to do so. We're only 12 months, let's just call it 12 months in the Google world of AI, and we're already seeing how much better these things get cyclically and very, very quickly, because it's that logarithmic scale, right? It took us, 2,000 years. We invented the wheel, and we got fire, wheel, etc. All of a sudden, computers. And if aviation, we're going to Mars within 100 years or so of being able to fly. AI is even an exponentially higher curve than that. So it's disrupting everything. And I think that's the biggest message. Is what happened to Google was they saw this as an imminent threat. They literally put out a red alert that, we're going to die if we don't do something. Except the way it was, what we've seen them do from an implementation standpoint is focus on shareholder value versus improve the thing that got them there to begin with. And which means hurting everybody else. That's really the biggest message. So they've been trying to 75% of their revenue, whatever it is, 87 billion, is based off of Google Ads. So on the above the fold, or that initial screen that we get, what we're seeing is representations of different pieces of types of content, like shopping ads or carousels or content, but it's mostly ads above the fold, which means that we don't have a chance like we used to before to actually get better organic traffic. We were talking about zero-click searches. back in the green room. And the result of that is it's even getting worse. Only 30%, a third of traffic actually goes to the open web, meaning your websites. Everything else goes to some type of Google property, whether it's YouTube or their shopping carousels, like we said, or different features, featured snippets, reviews, etc. So that really is the challenge. Is if we're looking at Google specifically as a channel, we're already 2/3 of the way behind where we used to be in 2024.
Yeah. That's fair. I think that the response of the SEO, there's kind of, I think, two important conversations for us to have around this volatility. So I think the SEO community has had a very strong response to what has happened this year. Basically, I would say we feel a little bit victimized, a little bit jerked around, a little bit devalued, and maybe a little bit is the wrong qualifier.
Yeah, there's been a lot of bad words happening on X all over the place and pointed at different Googlers and such. So it's our jobs have certainly become much more difficult, especially from the content organic standpoint. So what does that mean, right? Where do we go from here? And yes, we're living a disaster right now with Google. They are guilty of being a monopoly. They got fined $1.8 billion. They're going to be broken up in some way, shape, or form, which most of our industry thinks is a very good thing, because they should have never been allowed to get to the point they're at. And the problem is for small publishers like all of us, right? Medium range enterprises, it's been extremely disruptive to the business, because we're so used to getting organic traffic that it could be, in some cases, half of the revenue outside of their traditional media and, outdoor magazine, whatever, radio, TV. So yes, it's much more difficult. That doesn't mean that the overall playbooks of building a website, some of that's changed, but the infrastructure still stands, right? We still have to build a website the right way, because it's for the user, right? When somebody does end up on your website, and I think that's really the defining, the D mark of what we need to look at is, how do you get people to the website or to one of your communication channels? Right? It could be TikTok, right? It could be YouTube, as you're saying, from a lead gen. So really what's changed is, instead of us focusing entirely on the website, now we have to have website is one component of the entire digital marketing or PR mix, right? And that could be 20%, let's just call it that. But now you have to create a piece of content, then you have to divide it into 20 different pieces for each individual channel, and then see what works best and get your iterative process to get your KPIs right. It's overwhelming. Right. I mean, especially for small teams, it's like, how do we do all of this? So that's the way we're looking at it, is, we'll certainly change with the times. The old standbys still work, but it's a fractured environment now.
Absolutely. And so I think on the one hand, we have, people like yourself, Franco, who are doing this professionally, having the reactions that they do and understanding how to adjust the playbook or how to play the game differently, which I think for most SEOs, that's what this is, right? It always has been. For the past 20 years, we've been playing a game, right? Exactly. And now we feel a little bit like Google's changed the rules, or they've showed us that the rules weren't what they said they were, various things like that. So I think that's one side of the conversation. I think the other side of the conversation, and maybe Ross and Shannon can weigh in on this, is kind of the more passive observer, which I would say is the class that most marketing directors and CMOs fall into, of I'm not actively or professionally an SEO, right? So I'm watching or observing my data, my organic traffic fall off a cliff, and trying to make sense of it all. How are you, and Ross and Shannon, hearing clients or hearing people that are in your network kind of process through what they've watched happen on their websites this year?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the first piece of it is that realization that we talked about, right? I don't think a lot of people necessarily realize the impact that all of these changes are having on the organic traffic to their site. Because in most instances that I've seen, it's not been like a dramatic fall off a cliff in traffic, right? It's been, we're doing everything we've been doing for the last 5 or 10 years, and we're not growing this year. Maybe we're down 5, 10, 15, 20%. And why is that? And I think people need to kind of take a step back and say, well, so much has changed this year. People don't interact with Google the same way that they used to. Zero-click SEO is now a thing. People are going to AI and doing searches there rather than, going to Google and trying to sift through the 10 blue links. I think it's been a pretty fundamental change in consumer behavior, and I'm not sure that everyone is fully accepting or understanding of that yet. So I'd say that's, the first thing is really wrapping your head around that things have changed, the rules of the game have changed, and that what's worked in the past isn't necessarily going to work in the future.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that to say that while a great deal has changed, and that's the whole point of almost this entire webinar, we're going to go through that in detail, but it's easy to kind of lose track of, and I think Franco kind of started to touch on this, what actually hasn't changed amidst all of the disruption, which is to say that there are certain fundamentals that are still just as, if not more true than ever. For example, user experience. If a person can't easily find a page on your website when they get to the homepage, what's the likelihood that Google's going to find it? And how hard is Google really going to try when all they really want is to serve up information easily and keep people on the search page? And the same thing is true for content. I think for both user experience, building a website technically, and for creating content, a good exercise for this is to assume that the person who is on your website, any page, is starting it from a place of confusion and frustration. And that sounds like very negative, but if I already have a problem and I've been trying to solve it for 10 minutes and now I'm on your website, what do I expect to see to solve my problem, and what is going to make me blow my top? And I think if you start from there, you can really tighten it up to solve problems very quickly and create a product that is useful in and of itself. And from there, then we can dive into the other fiddly technical things and the games that Google's trying to play with us.
That's a great point. And I would add to Ross and Shannon's comments is that every industry we'll all like to think we're really unique, except every industry will have a pocket of customers in a certain area. Meaning it's almost like when you go fishing. If you want to catch a certain type of fish, you have to find the lake or the ocean that they're in, right? And it's really, so what kind of bait do you use, right? Is that TikTok, right? These platforms and channels really are that. I mean, Vaynerchuk's built a 400 million or whatever it is, $1 billion organization. And don't quote me on that. I don't know how much it makes, but all on social media. I mean, I've never been to his website, but everybody knows who Gary Vee is, right? And we see so that's the channel that he chose to focus on and deep dive. And he tests each one. And I think that really is part of the story is user experience, right? I'm getting the value of the question that I'm asking coming to the net with the problem. I need to buy X thing and I know I have a problem and that's going to solve it. So how do you think about that? How do you get in front of that particular user that's looking for what you have to offer?
Mm-hmm. I love that. I just want to say real quick, we've spent the last 6 months really learning TikTok. And from a business perspective, right? So there's content creators out there who are young and doing their skincare routines and they're getting millions of followers. But if you want to make money with content, right, on purpose as a business, there are certain rules to follow, right? You figure out a strategy, you got to crack the code. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what is that code, right? What do you say in the first second of a video to make the difference? What is the thumbnail gesture that works the best? There's so much minutia that goes into what the difference between a video that gets 6,000 views and one that gets 600 views, right? That's how business people and marketers need to be thinking about every single channel, because I think we fundamentally misunderstand what is and is not indexable content. Mm-hmm. And we forget that every single medium we employ in marketing can generate indexable content. And we're not gaining search just from blogs.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because there are specific video keywords, right, to what you're saying, right? That take up that portion of the above the fold on Google. So again, it's a multi-channel answer. But in the thousands of audits that we do every year, the majority, I'd say 95% of the business owners that we talk to and the CMOs and CEOs, they don't understand any of this at this point, right? Because they shouldn't. This is minutia, right? And these are things that we as digital marketers understand. But as a business owner, they're making the widgets and the things that they need to produce, right? So they usually come to us why am I not on the first page of Google? And how do you even answer that? I really feel disheartened because it's okay, now you have to educate because the world is changing every single month. Our business is changing. Marketing is changing every single month. So, you kind of have to fall back to that. AI is a superpower. right? And it gets better every single day, but how do you leverage it? And, how much time of the day are you going to allocate to doing that? And, and how do you do that? So I think that's these are the, to answer the overarching question, these are the things that we have to look at differently these days, as far as, lead gen is concerned.
Absolutely. Before we get into AI, because I do want to spend a good amount of time talking about that, because I think we have all spent enough time investigating it that we have some good things to say in terms of how we're thinking about it, how we're planning for it. But before we do that, Franco, I thought it would be helpful. So I think what you just said was very apt, right? Like the average CMO, CEO, marketing director even doesn't know what's wrong with their website and doesn't know what their website should have. So if we're thinking about just straight up, like I can pull this out from the transcript and print it off, like what is a checklist of things from a technical perspective that a website needs to have in order?
So 80-20, if we look at it from a Pareto standpoint, right? What are the 20% most important things that can improve things by 80%? Technical debt and infrastructure is really important, and they're relatively easy to solve. So we always start with sort of a baseline audit of how fast is the website, because speed really is the number one metric, because mobile first indexing, right? All that means is we are searching. Everybody does this. What's the first thing you grab off the nightstand when you wake up in the morning? You're grabbing this, right? So how do you optimize for this? And these don't have the same processing power as your desktop does, the computer that you have at work, or even a laptop. So speed is literally number one. So how do you back into that? Are your images well optimized? Are they the right size? We tend to look at that technical infrastructure first, because that affects everything. Because you're going to have a landing page that on TikTok, right, or Instagram, they're going to send them to the website in some form of content. So we really need to make sure that the engine in the car is as fast as it can be. So we start there essentially, and then moving up, we talked about indexable files like your robots.txt, your sitemaps, not sitemap in the way that you organize your content, but literally this is a file that every website has that feeds the search engines. Think of it like an API, sort of. That they can come in and get an output and understand which websites actually how it's built. Those are the first things that we start, and we see a lot of them that are okay, but we find typically a lot of inconsistencies, and the inconsistencies are usually the website's too heavy. You have a lot of JavaScript. You have animation sliders. People don't use sliders anymore. Please, for God's sake, don't use sliders. Right? I know they're visually beautiful, but they'll kill any benefit that they could be providing. So we technically clean that up first. And then the website's really, when you hit a website and it loads up in half a second or a second, or that landing page, that's a trust signal. So the user already likes it and they'll probably stay. By the time you get to 3 seconds load time, you lose 64% of your visitors. So that's essentially it, to answer your question. Clean up the technical debt first, and then move on to all of these AI content, distribution, video, etc.
I like that, and I think it. I'm already surprised by how much we've talked about UX on this call.
Sure.
And I really like the idea of Shannon's framing of like, just assume people are annoyed. Like assume They're coming to your website already annoyed. What are they going to experience when they get there? So I think like even not being a technical person or a technologist of any kind as a marketer, you can still look at it through that lens and make a reasonable assessment of like, are we in a good place or are we not? Right? If you're not, then you need to call Franco and download what plugin for your image compression?
Pixel Compress if you're on HubSpot, and there's a million tutorials for WordPress. But Pixel Compress is a one that we love, near and dear to our hearts. It's a tool that we created. But I would say this, avoid rage clicks. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that term, but we've all done it. You're on a website and you're like, I can't get what I need, right? There are tools that actually measure rage clicks. So you want to install your analytics. You want maybe PostHog. PostHog is an amazing tool. Maybe we'll talk about that one a little bit later. It does a lot more from a marketing standpoint as well. Like, where are people going to my menu, and which are my 80-20 menu items, and how do I rearrange them and such. So those are the first things that you want to take a look at, and then move on from there.
That's good. And I like the idea that somebody who's not a technologist could self-diagnose that in order to get started, because that's a huge challenge. All right, so let's pivot a little bit to artificial intelligence, because I guess we can't not, right? I mean, we must. This is now our life. AI's role in SEO. So let's talk about SEO first, and then we'll talk about content production. So talk a little bit about, you started this conversation, Franco, by ultimately saying if you were to summarize the 2024 SEO disruptions in a word, it would be AI.
Correct.
Which is an acronym, not a word. So I'm sure you didn't say word. How has it changed? So we've got AI overviews, we've got SGE, we've got some things like that. Give us like the high points.
So any version of AI is such a broad field now that, for example, they have AIs that can help you write software, right? And these tools are typically embedded into greater tools, right? If you're a programmer, you know the term ID, integrated development environment, where you're writing your code. There are AIs that can help you clean up your code much quicker. So productivity is really the name of the game in AI. Content production, right? It has to be tuned and you have to keep it within its guidelines and such. But there's nothing wrong with producing content with AI as long as it is strictly edited by humans to make sure that it provides value to the end user, right? I think that's the single most important measure of, if you're going to use AI for content, make sure that you are using it as a high-speed drill versus a manual drill, right? To produce what you're trying to do quicker. So if we're just focusing on the digital marketing perspective, AI is wonderful at creating images. AI is wonderful at producing content. AI is incredible for research. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys have, but Notebook LLM from Google is pretty amazing. It's a research tool where you can feed it basically an entity information, right? Like, I want to know everything about sports cars, and give it certain websites to read and upload PDFs, and it will become essentially a PhD version teacher for you and create outputs and summaries of what you need to learn. So in that context, AI is a super tool to accomplish whatever goal you're looking to accomplish. Like any other tool, you can probably rely on it a little bit too much, right, and overuse it. So that really is kind of the balance of what we're seeing. We use it for AI to say things like, okay, rewrite all of my meta descriptions for the website, right? And that's a great way to do it. But again, it's got to be within the context of, does this really improve it, or is it hurting? Am I hurting what people are reading? Is my end customer going to leave, or are they going to engage when they read this new meta description? And that really is the balance on the editorial side.
We got a question. I don't know who knows Andrew Kirkley, but he's listening. And he said, I was listening to a podcast from Christopher Penn. He suggested that because of LLM's SEO, content should be placed in as many places as possible. So generative engine optimization is, I'm guessing, what he is referring to. And it's something we've been talking a lot about. Are many major sites blocking AI spiders? And yeah, talk us through that.
So here's the dirty list. Andrew, by the way, I've known Andrew for a very long time, OSV in England. It's good to see Andrew. Yes, many sites are blocking AI, but it's too late because they're changing their IP addresses and grabbing the content anyway. Perplexity was caught doing that, and they're all doing it. So forget about blocking AI. It's just not going to happen. It's already done. So yes, should it be placed in many places as possible? And I think that's what we're talking about, Andrew, is like distribution channels, right? Yes, it's fine, but where are your customers? Are your customers on TikTok primarily? And maybe it's industry dependent. We work with a lot of industrial companies, and let's say let's say that you manufacture heavy equipment for an automotive plant, for example. That's going to be a very specific engineering mindset type of person, production, press manager, et cetera. So where those engineers hang out? Maybe it's TikTok, maybe it's not, maybe it's LinkedIn, right? Because they're looking for a certain thing. So yes, your content should be placed in whatever channel you think the end user is going to bite, essentially.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think we're thinking of content less as being pure play SEO content these days, and more being content that we can take and we can mold to different platforms and different mediums, and allow our consumers and potential clients to interact with it however they want. And I think that's another thing that AI can help with, right? Is if I create a piece of content, how can I create several variations of that, each that maybe speak to a slightly different audience or have a different format that's more suited to a certain platform? And it's not necessarily just, SEO content is a blog post or a topic cluster. I think it's much more broad than that, and we're having to think about it a little bit differently, because we can't just slap up a series of blog posts and wait for traffic to roll in anymore. That's not really how we're seeing things working.
Ross, I have a follow-up question to that, actually. Have you used AI to actually, so one of the things that is very time-consuming is figuring out your word count, right, and your title lengths and such for different social media platforms. AI should be able to tell you those and actually create a summary of the format of your blog post for that media. Have you guys used it like that?
We have, yeah. I think it's trial and error a little bit to get the systems to kind of coalesce and work the way that you want. And it's like any new skill, right? As marketers, I think a lot of us have learned AI over the past 12, 18, 24 months, and we're getting better at it. I think that's one use case for it. Another is, okay, I have this piece of content. Let's say it's a blog post. How can I turn it into an email? How can I turn it into 3 different social media posts for these different platforms? Various forms or ways to distribute that content. How can we take the kind of seed piece of content and how we generate that, whether it's from our own research, whether it's through AI, whether it's through an interview with someone from our client? How can we take that initial seed form of content and really make it suitable for all those distribution channels? And to your point, I think AI is a fantastic tool for that.
Yeah, for my part, I haven't had a great deal of luck getting AI to be helpful in terms of character counts. For words and character counts, I find it makes a lot of mistakes. But if it's something like you're trying to write a short ad or you need to draft a whole bunch of meta descriptions, it can get you closer. It can at least draft a short copy that is descriptive of the content it's referencing, but it's not likely to be the correct length without you manually checking and intervening. And to add on to what Ross was saying about how we should look at content as something that more holistic, that we should use to transform into targeted messages for different platforms, I would say this is another example of things that haven't actually changed. Like building on your content across different platforms has always been good practice. It's just more important now than it ever was, now that AI is kind of disrupting what all these platforms look like.
I imagine, Shannon, also that branding is become a little bit more important as well, because we know that Google optimizes for brands. And if you're a small player, then you really have to start, sort of that journey towards that marathon of becoming a brand digitally, right? To spread out across all the different channels. But are you seeing that as well? Like I'm not looking for a lead, because obviously as organic SEOs, we're like, okay, I need a lead and then I need a conversion. Do you need now impressions, right? And do you need like views and, dwell time? And I guess you would call it on video, how long they stayed on the video. And that, are you guys optimizing more for that from a KPI standpoint? And is AI helping to some degree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it is, and Shannon, forgive me, am I jumping on you? What it's forcing us to do is it's forcing us to get more granular about the basic infrastructure of each type of media. So like what Ross was saying, having a seed piece of content that's human created is key to me, right? So like the absolute best source for any like cluster of AI generated content is going to be a video, because it's a human being speaking with their own inflection and vocal patterns and word choices and all of that, which is going to be fundamentally unique, right? And then you can take that and you can iterate into multiple formats, but because the competition is increasing. So one of the things AI is doing is it's democratizing content production. You no longer have to be a professional writer to produce a lot of content, right? Is it good content? Who knows? But it's being created. So from the volume perspective, there are more contenders, right, for attention. So the quality of content has to be unique, but I think there's also just the understanding the patterns. So even in blog content, the application of blog content from a staging perspective, from a layout perspective, from a distance from hook to CTA, like all of that infrastructure is more important now because content is more competitive. Same with video, right? So the hook I can use on a TikTok video and the way that I have motion associated with the first second, blah, 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 blah. All that infrastructure is different, fundamentally different from what works on YouTube Shorts. And if marketers and content creators don't know that and can't optimize for that, they're going to lose, because we don't have to spend as much attention or effort anymore on the creation of of all the content, right? So the content itself has to be that much more optimized.
And I've heard it said before, and this is an old adage in SEO, is 20 years old. If it doesn't work in black and white, it will never work. If it doesn't work on a piece of paper to convince the user, it's not going to work on any channel. And if I hear you right, it's almost like every channel is a different language that you have to learn how to speak.
Yes.
Right? That's fascinating.
Well, I mean, we just went through a whole study of trigger words because trigger words are changing, right? So I mean, it's just, again, the volume. You have to think, like, what does volume do, right? When the printing press came out, how did that impact what was being written? Because what was being written and then mass produced wasn't as precious anymore because it didn't require as much effort. It's vitally important to think of the advent of content AI systems similarly, right? And what is it doing to either cheapen maybe the output or simply change the way we value it? Right? I talked to freelance writers about this. Like, your pricing has to change because the value people are associating with content is changing because of AI, because it feels more accessible. And so I think it's vitally important to communicate the human interception and the calibration that we're implementing as the value that we provide.
Right.
Because it's not just the content anymore.
Well, it's if so, going back to the black and white analogy, and I don't know if they're still doing this, but remember clickbait headlines, they still work, right? The Tabel is the world and Ookla or whatever. We have not changed that much fundamentally as human beings. We just have tools that are much faster than our brains can ever comprehend. But if an AI can all of a sudden, and I remember seeing something, I forget what newspaper it was. Let's just call it New York Post. Before their writers were allowed to produce a piece of content or publish a piece of content, they would have 25 headlines because the headline is 80% of the hook. You have to hook them first. And I know you have press credentials and such. So is AI accelerating that process where you can pick the best one and almost do the A/B test prior to publication?
So Shannon, talk to me about your use of AI in ad production. And it's okay. So an ad is the hardest kind of copy to write, hands down.
I would say that the biggest benefit of AI in ad production is volume. So and I've talked extensively about this to Lauren when we've been ideating this kind of thing. And basically, whether you're putting together a whole campaign or just one ad, the more ideas you have on paper, the easier it's going to be to get to something that's actually impactful, especially if you only need one or two of them. So, and coming up with ideas initially, getting from blank page to long list of potential ideas is a lot of times the hardest part because you don't really know what you like and want to work until you actually see a list of stuff that won't work. So for me, creating ad copy, using a whole bunch of different prompts and different angles to iterate a list of 50 options is the biggest advantage of using AI tools because it gets you to the point where you're editing and perfecting a lot faster. But I would say that probably 9 times out of 10, the version that you go with is at least half human written, if not more, because really the best ideas are still going to come from a person.
Right.
So far.
And as we change psychologically, I guess, right? Because clickbait, I mean, we still click on it, right? It's changed because it's clickbait now. Before it was like you just get emotionally tied or triggered to it. And it's why Google doesn't, they'll devalue clickbaity headlines organically as well. So, but ads probably won't, right? If you're in the right channel. So that's again.
I would also say that it's a lot easier to edit your content, whether it's a blog article or an ad, ruthlessly if it comes from AI first, because you're not as attached to it emotionally when you haven't crafted it. So if you're starting from a point of AI generation, it's easier to perfect it to a more powerful place because you don't have quite as much of that bias going along with it.
That's amazing.
So AI in content production is obviously something that we've spent a ton of time thinking about, and I'll work on maybe a video about the Hire a Writer site. So we've spent 10 months experimenting with AI generated content for the Hire a Writer site, which is one of our digital properties. We started the year at about 2,000 hits a month, and we're up to over 10,000 hits a month now within the course of 10 months. We blog on it maybe 30 times a week. So it's high volume. It's meticulously edited and optimized by a human, right? So I've put budget behind it to ensure that that's the case. All of the images are AI generated and in a different art style. But I think that the most interesting thing that we've done is we've created informational design. So instead of having a blog that is on a topic, we essentially went like zoomed out and said, like, what if instead of topic clusters, we do basically what we call, and I have no reason for calling it this other than that, I think it sounds good, is like concept clusters. So what we decided to do is we switched from, I'm going to show you this because I think it is cool. We switched from just topics to having all of these different categories of content, because AI's advantage is volume, right? So if you can zoom out and figure out how to occupy a wider share of organic search by capturing a wider array of semantically related key phrases, you win, right? And we've seen it happen. So we have a business blog, a social media blog, an SEO strategy blog, storytelling blog, CTAs, a creative writing blog, and a technical writing blog. This website ranks for everything from like SEO agency to dystopian literature. We have this vast array. I think we have like 15,000 key phrases now that this website ranks for. And so it's a practice and a principle that I think is a bigger picture item here. And it comes down to a little bit website structure, Franco, and a little bit informational design, Ross and Shannon, where it's like, think bigger picture in terms of your content strategy, and think about how the acceleration of content production supported by AI could ultimately allow you to expand and create a big, big, big digital property in, I mean, this would have taken 10 years.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. Let's unpack the term semantically related, because a lot of that can be a little bit, that's an inside the bubble digital marketing term. So one thing that everything that you put on Hire a Writer has in common is that you're talking about blogging. It's sections in different department. It's departmentalized by the type of blogging that you're talking about or writing that you're talking about. What we see all too often is a company will go off topic, especially like home services. I'll be a plumber. I'm a plumber and an HVAC guy, and I'm a door window guy, right? You can't have those on the same website, because Google, at least for Google, because it will devalue the fact that you're not an expert in HVAC because you're doing doors. You're not an expert in doors and windows because you're doing plumbing. So when we talk about compartmentalizing, it's very broad what you're doing, but you're doing it at the same level. There's not different verticals of topics there. That's a key thing. If your website, if you all of a sudden you start talking about something that is not related to the business that you have because you're adding another product line or a different business, that should be another website, and that should be another social media strategy and digital PR, because you will get devalued at that point. Yeah.
And I mean, when you said social media, like beyond, like
Right.
the number of businesses who are trying to run a social media account, like people underestimate how niched social media is and should be.
Right.
And absolutely the same with and this is why you need an SEO strategist to come along probably and assist on this part, because the psycholinguistics, the semantic relationships, the linguistic preferences and utilization, all these things are vitally important to a strategy like this.
And that's how the algorithm works. I mean, it literally is neuro-linguistic programming. It just means, are these words related, and how close are they in relation, and where do I need to put this from a keyword standpoint?
Yeah.
Again, very, very technical conversation, but extremely necessary. No, extremely necessary, because the essential, if we boiled it down, is don't go off topic on what you're trying to sell on the website.
Right. And
Yeah,
AI,
I think when we think about informational design, that's true as well. And I think increasingly the job of an SEO consultant or a strategist is to, really take these topics, build an understanding of them, what's included in those topics and what isn't, and use that to kind of inform the strategy of what you should write about going forward. Because, the common thread in, I think, what you're both talking about is discipline, right? You need to have some discipline about what you write content about and what you want your website to be about. That has to match very closely with, in practical terms, the real life of what your business is and what it does. So I think being able to understand that, especially in industries that are always growing more complex or within like very specific niches, I think that's going to be an important skill set for SEOs going forward.
So similar to what I asked Franco about, kind of giving a bullet list of, okay, here's technically some of the major things your website needs to take into consideration. Ross, would you be willing to just kind of give us that for as you are forecasting like content strategies for clients? Like, what are the big picture items that you would say, like, these are the things you have to be thinking of as you put together an SEO content strategy for next year?
Yeah, I think, similar to what I just talked about, a lot of it is understanding the foundational concepts of whatever topic it is that's most relevant to you and making sure you cover those from a topical perspective, right? So there are certain things that, depending on your business, you just have to talk about, right? They're table stakes. To not talk about them is disqualifying. So understanding those. I think the second piece is understanding the unique perspective that you have as a business. And we haven't really got into this conversation yet, but as we talked about, one of the superpowers of AI is volume. It's a machine gun. It gives you the ability to blast out blog articles and pieces of content on pretty much everything. So I think you need to be, one, disciplined, as I just talked about, but two, you also have to wrap a layer on top of that that says, okay, this is, the unique perspective we have at our business. This is what our people are really good at. This is our competitive differentiation in the market. And then you have to translate that into the content and make sure you do it in a way that's compelling and that's interesting to the people who are ultimately going to read it. Because, while we do, and we can and do design content to be indexed by search engines and to be visible and for people to find it, it really matters what that experience looks like when people come to your page, which I think is the next area of the checklist. And something that Shannon spoke to earlier on in the call, which is assume that people are coming from a place of frustration. They have a problem that they want to be solved. How can you answer that question for them? How can you answer it in the introduction, very briefly and succinctly? But then how can you unpack all the nuance and the detail behind their question and give them a more comprehensive answer that, one, helps that person understand what they need to understand, but secondly, really casts your business as a thought leader and, as a body or an entity who really knows and understands this topic and can provide value to its clients above and beyond what you can describe in a simple blog article. So I think those are some of the items that I'd look at from a checklist perspective is, okay, these are the things that you have to be doing and have to translate into your content strategy.
And that's Ross, if I can add one bullet point to what you're saying, because it's there's one thing that exactly what you're mentioning about the show that you're the niche resource and expert in that topic, is one thing that we ask clients to do is add a personal experience of how they solved a problem inside a blog, even if it was just a paragraph or two. We had a case where X happened and we did Y, and that really seems to every time we've done that, that seems to boost that EAT, the expertise, trustworthiness, authority of those are. But you're talking about the same thing, right? How do you prove? And AI can't do that for you, right? Because that's a personally relatable story that it's a one-to-one, it's a human factor. So
sure. Yeah, I think it's all about, how can you differentiate your content from AI content? And that, is one clear way that also provides a lot of value to the end reader and the person who's interacting with your content.
It's a great point.
And I think, go ahead, Jan.
I was just going to say, I would add to this that a great way to approach this, interrogating your content to make sure it's actually valuable and helpful, and by content, I mean the entire website, not just like a blog post, is to make sure your okay buts are answered. So like, say I have a draft of a blog post, like, okay, but what is it? Okay, but how do I do it? Okay, but where do I buy this thing? Like all the follow-up questions that somebody would naturally have, like say I'm on your homepage, you say, like the ultimate intelligence app. Okay, but what is it? What does that mean? What does that mean for me? I'm trying to buy tickets to an event. Okay, but where the heck do I check out? I can't get there. I'm on a how-to blog post. Okay, but how do I actually do it? Where do I get this information? It's a research. Okay, but where do these stats come from? So if you kind of interrogate it from that perspective, I think you can raise the value in a quick and practical way that will ultimately help to differentiate you from a lot of AI content, because AI content doesn't naturally interrogate itself that way. You need a person to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's another brilliant point. It's like the what's in it for me metric from the client standpoint, right? What's the next step? Like we see too many missing CTAs sometimes, right? What do I do from here? You gave me the knowledge, but where do I go?
Right. Yeah. Love that. It's the constant balance. And I think CRO, or conversion rate optimization, is going to become an increasing emphasis in this coming year, especially if we are able to successfully implement things like good informational design, drive a ton more organic traffic. Like if we can play the game, to your point, both Franco and Shannon, like then what, right? Once they get there, how are we ensuring that there is a path set forward? And there are too many companies that we go into and have, basically no funnels, and they can say, okay, we've gotten this many incoming visits from organic search, and they can't tell us how many forms they've filled out or how many conversions they've had, which I think undermines the credibility of the exercise, especially in leadership's view.
And the tactics behind that are fascinating too, because we've never had, talking about a main menu, like, your informational organization, nav boost. There's parts of Google's algorithm that work a certain way because it's still a computer and it's doing X, it's stepwise processing. Even analytics we've never had a good way of determining a user journey in the funnel standpoint, because what we're talking about from the how do I capture more people is the top of the funnel. They don't even know you exist, right? So there's the branding play. You have to have your logo and your brand and you talk about what you do, et cetera. Then the bottom of the funnel is what you're talking about. How do you lead nurture them? How do you engage them enough, to Shannon's point, that they're going to take the next step, right? And what's in it for me? So there are new tools, PostHog being one of them that I mentioned earlier, that you can set up. It's a little bit technical, but imagine that you could see where people are actually using your main menu navigation, right? And you don't want to disrupt that a lot, because we've seen 80% drops in traffic just by moving a particular navigation item, because historically Google and search engines, they keep that path as a roadmap to what works and what doesn't on the website, and then they score the pages. I think of kosher that we worked on together, Joy, for a while. Passover recipes, they actually moved the word Passover off the main menu, and all of a sudden we had like a ridiculous 300% increase in impression rate within a week just prior to Passover. So these things are very, very important to understand. Again, for the CEO, CMO, just be aware that you have to analyze these things from a topical standpoint, and then apply the strategies that Ross and Shannon are talking about.
Starts to seem like a full-time job.
And then some.
So stands to reason, and I appreciate all y'all's input on this. I think there's lots of good tips that we kind of went through and ways that we're thinking about integrating AI thoughtfully in our process and for content production. Let's pivot a little bit to now, like thinking about challenges that we're looking at overcoming this year. We know that Google, business practices, like the reality is we're still playing this game. We may be on Bing and we may be on other places, but we're still mostly swimming in the Google Sea. So as we think about what we have seen historically, history being precedent for projections, right? What do you think, maybe Franco first, is kind of going to happen in the next year? Crystal ball us, hypothesize, and how can we react intelligently or prepare?
Well, I've never won the lottery, so I don't know how much value you're going to get out of me crystal balling anything, but
we're using crystal balling as a verb, and that's
no, absolutely. One thing that we see, and if we look at behavior, right, that I think that's a good marker, is one thing that we see is people are using Google less and less because the results are frankly bad nowadays compared to what they used to be, right? So one thing that I'm doing a lot more, that I notice myself doing, I should say, and it's not deliberate, is I go to Perplexity, for example, one of these AI search engines, because the results are just there. It's Google 15 years ago. It gives me the straight answer. I don't want any fluff, and it gives you the cited resources. For you to optimize for that on your website, you don't have to do anything, because Perplexity's already read your website, right? And we test this extensively with our client base. Is, are they showing up in AI? Are they showing up in ChatGPT? Just Google your services and see if give me the top 10 companies that do X, or top 20, and see if you're in that list. It's probably already crawled to your site, even if you block the robots.txt file. So crystal balling is optimizing your website. The old playbook is still the new playbook. It's just that we have to expand the channels. We're still doing the same thing. Just take care of your users. When somebody, this is another great sign, I think Marcus Sheridan is one that talks about this a lot, is what about your review mining, if you remember those days? Talk to your customers. How did they find you? What was their biggest pain point? And then reflect that and mirror that on whatever channel you're on, whether that's organic or social, et cetera. So I think the crystal AI will pick that up as well. And it does a better job because it filters through all of the nonsense that we tend to, put around all of that, like, I'm the premier this, or I'm doing that, or et cetera, and just gives you the straight answer of here's what you're looking for, right? And that really is, I think, where it's going, which makes it great, because there's always winners and losers, right? Perplexity is starting to win a little bit about Google. Maybe somebody replacing Perplexity. You know, OpenAI is having some trouble with Microsoft now, so who knows what ends up being there. But what we see being stable is it's a better answer, it's a faster answer, and it's a leverage tool that works much better than we've had before. So I would say just focus on the important things, which is answering your customers' questions, and give them an opportunity to call this an escape hatch. And Kieran and I talked about this a lot, is giving them a way to contact you, whether that's picking up the phone, make sure your button's clickable, filling out a reasonable form. You don't need 16 form fields. Name and email's fine, right? You can figure out the rest when you talk to them. And then the back of the house is really important. Right, especially like if we're talking about home services, whoever picks up the phone first within that first 30 seconds, 40 usually wins 80% of the business. So again, still human factors, right? If I'm made the effort to talk to you, pick up the phone, treat me as a customer, and you'll win at the end of the day. So crystal balling it is like life hasn't changed; it's just gotten a lot faster.
Yeah, that's good. What do you think, Ross? Do you think there are projections or reasonable expectations about this coming year and what we'll see?
I think, one of the things we can say is we expect more change to happen, right? I think the thing with AI is it's evolving so fast. There's so much change. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, we can look at things that we did a year ago and it's like unrecognizable. Like we would never recommend something like that as a strategy today. Or, the Google experience looks completely different today to how it did a year ago. So I think we can expect more change to come in that scenario, and it's going to be important to remain nimble. And I think in that context, we can also expect this trend of Google trying to keep more and more people on Google-owned platforms rather than sending people to individual websites, right? I think it's a bit naive to expect that Google should do anything else. Their responsibility is to their shareholders. They want to keep people on that platform interacting with experiences that they can define and control. They want to earn extra ad revenue, and we need to learn how to play in that new system. And part of that, I think, as Franco mentioned, is to really focus on owning those relationships with our customers, with our potential customers. How can we get away from this, idea that we essentially rent our traffic off of Google every month, either through ads or through creating content? How can we broaden and add more diverse channels and platforms and ways for us to reach our consumers? So I think that is, more change is coming. Let's remain nimble, and let's always, as always in marketing, let's keep testing and experimenting and iterating and tweaking and keep doing what works best.
Yeah.
And then for my part, I would say two things. First, despite all of the change, I think there's going to be an increased importance in going back to the fundamentals. And Franco, you touched on this a bit already, but like things like if I have a question I need to enter on your website, how many times do I have to click to get there? Are my headers posing relevant questions? And is the content that follows the header, are the first two sentences providing some kind of answer to that question? Things like that are really tightening up our fundamental practices and pulling our websites together to be stronger is ultimately going to position us better, whether we're on Google or Perplexity or Bing or DuckDuckGo or wherever. And the other thing I think will be really important is thought leadership and original research. And we haven't really touched on this that much, but with AI democratizing the content creation space, everybody can create a lot of content, even targeted and helpful content. But what everybody cannot do is provide original and relevant data that those AI pieces can then cite and leverage and use, that we can talk about in these webinars and post on LinkedIn and create helpful infographics about. So if you're able to do that, I think that's a really great way to differentiate yourself.
It's a great point. And circling back a little bit to a point that Ross made is, we have to learn how to deal with the new environment. Google's going to get broken up. So, this disruption is going to cost a lot of opportunity as well for the early adopters in whatever turns out to be. Maybe there's a competitor to Google Ads because that's the only market in town, right? I mean, so if we do have a competitor, maybe it's early adoption, that's going to be a big deal. It's like when I'm old enough to remember when the phone Bell South got broken up, right? And it became this, the environment that we have today where it's very competitive, it's less expensive, and you have a lot of options, right? With Verizon and, AT&T and everybody else. So I think there's a lot to, keep an eye towards the future of, what is this going to look like in another 5 years, right? And probably sooner than that, because they're going to start breaking it up. And then what do they do? That's going to be a fascinating read and watch once that happens, because it's long overdue. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love that, all of that, you guys. I think that's all very helpful. I mean, I always say that being a content-oriented marketer is like playing 8 games of chess at a time, right? And you move one piece per board every day. Right? But I also think there's an element, and I think this is really important, Franco, of being very good opportunists and understanding which trains, like being brave and willing enough to take the risks in like uncharted territory and say, I'm going to go jump on that train. But then also knowing when to jump off and having enough discernment and acumen to be able to say, like, we need to be everywhere, right? How do we show up as many places as possible? Because we don't ultimately have a crystal ball, right?
Exactly.
We don't know what the future will hold, and we need to be as visible as we can be to the right people. So.
But also organic, a lot of companies are like, I just need to be on Google, right? So they're just doing the organic play without any PPC or any social. When I say PPC, I'm just encompassing all the paid impression rates on Instagram, et cetera. You have to do that these days. And that could be as simple as a $10 a day budget, right? I mean, just to keep a branding play going. But you have to do those things these days, because otherwise your competitors are going to eat your clock. Yeah. So.
Love it.
Clean your clock. Eat your lunch. Sorry.
Maybe it's time for you to go eat lunch.
Yes, it is. Never call me late for lunch.
Guys, I feel like we kept it from being too technical, but maybe nobody agrees. We're about to find out. We'll go ask all our friends who watched. I appreciate you guys being here. I think that it's important for us as marketers, especially when you become a marketing leader. It can be really hard to be exposed to the thought processes and planning processes of other people because you don't have colleagues as a leader, right? Which I think is problematic. So hopefully this is useful to people. I appreciate you guys being here and sharing your lunch hour with us, although you didn't get to eat. So let's go do that.
That was fun. Thank you for having me. It's great to see you guys.
Oh, Jonathan had a question, but I'll message you for it. Okay. Sorry, Jonathan. We'll talk soon.